The auction started at 9 in the morning, and by 9:15 Mara Ellison had stopped counting. She stood on the porch of what used to be her house, arms wrapped tight around herself, watching strangers pick through her life like vultures over a carcass. The auctioneer's voice carried across the frozen yard, sharp and rhythmic, turning memories into dollars. Her grandmother's quilt went for 3. The dining table Thomas had built with his own hands went for 12. The rocking chair where she'd nursed both her children sold before she could even process the number. She didn't cry, couldn't afford to. Crying was a luxury, and luxuries had ended the day the bank notice arrived. Lot 47, cast iron skillet, Dutch oven, wooden utensils. Mara's head snapped up. Her kitchen things, the last pieces of the only work she'd ever been good at. A woman in a blue bonnet raised her hand. $2. $2.50, came another voice. Mara stepped forward before she could think. $5. The auctioneer paused, squinting at her. The crowd turned. She felt their eyes like brands. "Ma'am," the auctioneer said slowly, "you can't bid on your own property." "It's not my property anymore, is it?" Her voice came out harder than she intended. "You made that clear." Silence spread across the yard. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Someone give me 6. No one spoke. "Sold," he finally muttered, waving her forward with obvious distaste. $5 to the lady. Mara walked through the crowd, feeling their judgment like winter through a torn coat. She counted out $5 bills, nearly the last money she had, and took the skillet, the pot, and the spoon. The weight of them in her arms felt like both an anchor and a lifeline. By noon, everything else was gone. The house, the land, the furniture, the clothes, all of it scattered to strangers who'd never known Thomas, never known the children, never known what any of it meant. The auctioneer packed up his podium. The crowd dispersed, and Mara stood alone in a yard that wasn't hers anymore, holding 3 pieces of cast iron and wondering what the hell came next. She was 42 years old. She had no family left. Both children lost to fever before they turned 5. Thomas dead from a logging accident 2 winters back. Her own parents gone long before that. No friends close enough to take in a widow with nothing. No skills anyone would pay for except cooking, and even that was barely considered a skill. Women cooked. That's just what they did. Nobody hired a woman to do what she should have been doing in her own kitchen anyway. The bank agent approached as she stood there, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "I'm sorry it came to this." She didn't look at him. "Are you? The bank gave you every opportunity. The bank took everything the day my husband died, and you know it." She turned then, meeting his eyes. "Don't dress it up as mercy." He flinched. "Good. Let him be uncomfortable." She'd been uncomfortable for 2 years. "There's a boarding house in town," he offered. "Mrs. Patterson sometimes takes in." "I asked her already. She said no." "The church also no." He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to leave. "Well, I wish you the best." "Do you?" He didn't answer, just tipped his hat and walked back to his carriage, relieved to be done with her. Mara looked west toward the mountains. She'd heard there were settlements out there. Rough places, mostly men, logging camps and mining operations and ranches carved out of wilderness. Places that might not ask too many questions. Places that might need someone who could turn nothing into something edible. She had $5 left after buying back her own cooking tools. Enough for maybe a week of food if she stretched it. Not enough for anything else. So she started walking. The first town turned her away before she'd even finished asking. "We don't need any help," the trading post owner said, not looking up from his ledger. "I cook well," Mara tried. "I can work for just food and a place to sleep." I said no. The second town was worse. The innkeeper took one look at her. Worn dress, wild hair from 2 days of walking, eyes too direct for a woman, and shook his head. "Don't take on women alone. Causes problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind I don't need." He turned his back, conversation over. The third town didn't even let her ask. A man on the street took her arm as she approached the general store, steering her firmly back the way she'd come. "Best keep moving," he said. Not unkind, but final. "We don't need any trouble." "I'm not trouble." Maybe not. But a woman alone always becomes trouble one way or another. Keep walking. So she did. 4 days in, her feet were bloody. 6 days in, she ran out of food. She ate bark and snow and kept moving because stopping felt like dying. The mountains grew steeper. The air got thinner. Towns became scarcer until they disappeared entirely, replaced by scattered camps and isolated cabins where men stared at her like she was a ghost. She stopped asking for work, just took what she could, a night in a barn here, a crust of bread there, and moved on before anyone could decide she was a problem worth solving. By the 10th day, she started to understand why women didn't do this, why they stayed in bad situations, married men they didn't love, endured things that ground them down to nothing, because being alone in the wilderness was somehow worse, because the world had no place for a woman who didn't belong to anyone, who couldn't be categorized or controlled or counted. She was a problem, a question mark, something that needed to be dealt with, and so everyone dealt with her by pretending she didn't exist. The settlement appeared on the 12th day, just as Mara was starting to think she might actually die out here. It wasn't much. Maybe 30 buildings clustered around a frozen creek, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of hammers and saws cutting through the mountain silence. A lumber operation from the looks of it, which meant workers, which meant men who needed feeding. Mara stood at the edge of the settlement, gathering what was left of her courage. She looked terrible, she knew. Dress torn and filthy, face gaunt from hunger, eyes probably wild. Not the kind of appearance that inspired confidence. But she'd come too far to stop now. She walked into the settlement like she had every right to be there, head up despite everything. Heads turned, conversation stopped. She ignored all of it and headed straight for the largest building, a 2-story structure that looked like it might be a dining hall or some inn. Inside, the heat hit her like a wall. 24 men sat at long tables eating what looked like stew. The smell nearly dropped her to her knees. A large woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked Mara up and down, expression unreadable. "We don't give out charity," she said. Mara forced her voice steady. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for work. Don't need help. I can cook. So can I. That's why I run the kitchen. I can cook well." The woman snorted. "Every woman says that. Let me prove it." "With what? You got ingredients I don't know about hidden in that dress?" Mara glanced at the kitchen, then back at the woman. "Give me your scraps, whatever you were going to throw out. Give me 20 minutes. The woman stared at her. Several of the men had stopped eating to watch. "You're serious?" "Completely." A long pause. Then the woman shrugged. "Fine. But when you fail, you leave. Don't care where you go, but you don't stay here begging. Deal?" "Deal." The woman led her to the kitchen, a hot, chaotic space that smelled of grease and smoke and overcooked meat. She pointed to a bucket in the corner. "Scraps, mostly fat trimmings, some vegetable ends, burned bits. Was going to give it to the pigs. It's yours." Mara set down her skillet and pot and got to work. She had cooked her whole life. Through good times and bad, through grief and joy, through everything the world had thrown at her. Cooking was the one thing she'd never failed at. The one thing that made sense when nothing else did. She sorted through the scraps quickly. Fat trimmings, good for rendering. Onion ends, could be salvaged. Carrot tops and potato peels, usable. Some burned bits of meat, she could work with that. She got a fire going in the stove, heated her skillet, rendered the fat. While it melted, she chopped the vegetable scraps fine, picking out the good parts. She scraped the burned crust off the meat and minced what remained. When the fat was liquid and golden, she added everything to the pan. The smell changed immediately. She had no spices except salt and some old pepper she found in a jar. But she knew timing. She knew heat. She knew how to coax flavor out of things that seemed worthless. After 15 minutes, she had something that looked almost like a proper dish. After 20, she plated it on a tin dish and carried it out to the main room. The woman took one look and raised an eyebrow. Then she took a bite. Her expression changed. She took another bite, then another. Then she set down the fork and looked at Mara with something that might have been respect. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" "From doing it every day for 20 years. The woman nodded slowly. Then she glanced at the men, most of whom were still watching. "You," she called to a young man near the door. "Come try this." He approached cautiously, took the offered fork, ate a bite. His eyes widened. "That's good. he said, surprised. It's better than good, the woman corrected. She looked back at Mara. You got somewhere to stay? No? You do now. I'll pay you $2 a week plus food and a cot in the back room. You help me with the cooking, and we split the work. Sound fair? Mara felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in weeks. More than fair. Good. What's your name? Mara Ellison. Ruth Carson. She stuck out her hand and Mara shook it. Welcome to Pinewood. Now eat something before you fall over. You look half dead. For 3 weeks, Mara worked in Ruth's kitchen. She learned the rhythms of feeding 40 hungry men 3 times a day. She learned how to make supplies stretch, how to turn cheap cuts into something worth eating, how to keep a kitchen running when everything was scarce. The men started requesting her dishes specifically. They'd ask Ruth if the new woman was cooking tonight. Ruth acted annoyed, but Mara could tell she was pleased. Business picked up. It was the closest thing to stability Mara had felt since Thomas died. But on the 4th week, an old man came through the settlement. He wasn't a worker, too old, too weathered, moving like every step hurt. He sat alone in the corner during dinner, eating slowly, saying nothing. Most of the men ignored him. Travelers came through sometimes, and unless they caused trouble, nobody paid much attention. But after dinner, as Mara was cleaning up, he approached the kitchen. That was the best meal I've had in 6 months, he said. Mara turned, surprised. Thank you. You trained somewhere? Just at home. Cooking for family. He nodded, studying her. You're wasted here. Excuse me? Don't get me wrong, this is good work, but you've got a rare gift, the kind that shouldn't be stuck feeding loggers stew every night. Mara wiped her hands on her apron, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. I'm grateful to have work at all. Sure, but you could have better. He leaned against the door frame. You ever hear of the Rourke Ranch? No. About 30 miles west, high up in the mountains. Big operation, cattle, timber, horses. Elias Rourke runs it. He's been looking for a cook for 2 months. Can't keep anyone. Place is too remote, works too hard, and Rourke himself is... He paused, searching for the right word. Difficult. Why are you telling me this? Because I just came from there. I told Rourke I'd keep an eye out for someone who could handle it, and you can. You don't know that. I know good cooking when I taste it, and I know a woman who doesn't quit when I see one. You walked here from somewhere, didn't you? Through the mountains, alone. Mara didn't answer. Thought so. He straightened up. Pays $4 a week plus room and board. More than you're making here. And it's year-round, not just seasonal. Rourke doesn't let people go once they prove themselves. And if I can't prove myself, then you're back where you started. But at least you tried. Mara turned back to the dishes. I have steady work here. Why would I risk that? Because steady isn't the same as good, and because you're not the kind of woman who settles for steady when better exists. He tipped his hat. Think about it. If you decide to go, head west along the Ridge Trail. Look for the Broken Pine marker. Ranch is another 5 miles past that. He left before she could respond. That night, Mara lay on her cot in the back room, staring at the ceiling. $4 a week, year-round work, a place too remote for anyone else to want. It sounded perfect, which probably meant it was terrible, but the old man was right about one thing. She wasn't the kind to settle. She'd walked 12 days through wilderness to get here. What was another 30 miles? Ruth wasn't happy when Mara told her the next morning. You're crazy, she said flatly. Elias Rourke is a bastard. Everyone knows it. He goes through cooks like kindling because nobody can stand working for him. Maybe they weren't good enough. Or maybe he's impossible. Ruth crossed her arms. You've got good work here, Mara. Why throw it away? Because good isn't great, and I need great. Ruth sighed. You're going to regret this. Probably, but I'm going anyway. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she went to the pantry and came back with a small sack. Take this. Dried meat, some flour, matches. You'll need it for the climb. Mara felt her throat tighten. Ruth, don't. Just take it. And don't die on the mountain. I'd feel bad. Mara took the sack. Thank you. Yeah, well, don't thank me yet. You haven't met Rourke. The climb took 2 days. The trail the old man mentioned was barely a trail at all. more like a suggestion scratched into the mountainside by people who'd gone before. Steep switchbacks, loose rocks, sections where the path simply disappeared and Mara had to scramble over boulders and hope she was still going the right direction. The elevation stole her breath. The cold bit through every layer she had. Twice she thought about turning back, but she didn't. On the second afternoon, she found the broken pine, a massive tree split down the middle by lightning, its charred halves pointing in opposite directions like a warning. The trail continued west, dropping into a valley she hadn't been able to see from below. 5 more miles. She could do 5 more miles. The ranch appeared just as the sun touched the western peaks. It was bigger than she'd expected. A main house, 2 barns, several outbuildings, corrals with horses and cattle, all of it perched on a shelf of land carved out of the mountain. Smoke rose from the main house. Lights glowed in windows. Men moved between buildings, finishing evening chores. Mara stood at the edge of the property, suddenly aware of how she must look. 2 days climbing a mountain hadn't improved her appearance. She was soaked from crossing a creek, covered in mud from a fall, hair wild, eyes probably desperate. But she'd come 30 miles. Turning back wasn't an option. She walked up to the main house and knocked. The door opened immediately and a man looked out. Not Rourke. Too young, maybe 25. He frowned at her. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Elias Rourke." "What for?" "I heard he needs a cook." The young man's frown deepened. Then he glanced over his shoulder and called, "Boss, someone here about the cooking job." Heavy footsteps. Then a man appeared in the doorway, and Mara understood immediately why people said he was difficult. Elias Rourke looked like the mountain itself had shaped him. Broad shoulders, hard angles, a face that seemed carved from granite. His eyes were dark and cold, assessing her in one brutal sweep that took in everything and judged it lacking. "You're the cook?" His voice matched his appearance. Rough, blunt, brooking no argument. "Yes." "You look half dead." "I climbed 30 miles to get here. I'll look better tomorrow." "Climbed alone?" "Yes." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "Why?" "Because I need work, and I heard you're hiring." "I am, but I go through cooks like water through a sieve. None of them last. What makes you think you're different?" Mara met his eyes. "Let me cook for you. You can decide after that." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "Fine. 1 week trial. You get room and board. If you make it the full week without quitting or failing, we'll talk about wages. If you don't, you leave. Understood?" "Understood. Kitchen's in the back. Dinner's supposed to be at 6. You've got an hour." He turned away. "Don't disappoint me." The door closed and Mara stood alone on the porch, adrenaline and exhaustion warring in her chest. She'd made it. Now she just had to prove she could stay. The kitchen was a disaster. Mara stood in the doorway taking it in. Unwashed dishes piled in the basin, food scraps on the floor, the stove cold and filthy, supplies scattered everywhere without organization or sense. No wonder Rourke couldn't keep a cook. Who would want to work in this chaos? But Mara had worked in chaos before. She'd raised 2 children, nursed a dying husband, and held together a household that was falling apart around her. A dirty kitchen was nothing. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. First the stove. She cleared out the ash, got a fire going, heated water. While the water warmed, she cleared the dishes, scraped and sorted, found the soap. She washed everything in assembly line fashion, stacking clean plates and pots on the counter. Then she took stock of supplies: flour, dried beans, salt pork, some tired-looking vegetables. Not much to work with, but enough. She had 45 minutes until dinner. She could do this. She'd made 100 harder meals with less. At 6 o'clock, 13 men filed into the dining room. Mara had set the table, lit the lamps, and put out serving bowls of beans cooked with salt pork and onions, cornbread still hot from the oven, and a simple slaw made from the cabbage she'd found half forgotten in the pantry. The men stopped when they saw the table. "Damn," one of them muttered. "Hasn't looked like this in months." They sat down, serving themselves, glancing at each other, and then at the kitchen door where Mara stood watching. Elias entered last. He looked at the table, then at her. His expression gave away nothing. He took a bite of beans, chewed slowly, swallowed. "It's edible," he said. One of the men laughed. "It's better than edible, boss. It's actually good." Another nodded. "Best we've had since Martha left." Elias didn't respond, just kept eating. But he cleaned his plate, and when he stood to leave, he paused by the kitchen door. "Breakfast is at 5, he said. "If you're still here." Then he was gone. Mara leaned against the counter, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 1 meal down, 20 more to go before the week was over. She could do this. She had to. The first crack in the routine came at breakfast on day 3. Mara had been up since 4:30, getting the stove hot, mixing biscuit dough, frying eggs and salt pork. The men filed in at 5 sharp, same as the previous 2 mornings. They ate in near silence, shoveling food like it was fuel, nothing more. But when she brought out a third batch of biscuits, one of the younger men, the same one who'd answered the door her first night, looked up. "These are really good," he said. The table went quiet. Mara paused, unsure how to respond. "I mean it," he continued, oblivious to the stares. "My ma used to make biscuits like this. I haven't had any this light since I left home." An older man across from him snorted. "Don't go getting sentimental, Carter. They're just biscuits." I'm just saying they're good, Frank. That a crime?" "It's unnecessary." Carter's face reddened. "You're eating 3 of them yourself." "That's different." "How?" "Because I'm not making a production out of it." Mara cleared her throat. "There's more if anyone wants them." Frank looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived. His expression was hard to read. Not quite hostile, but not friendly either. Like he was trying to figure out what category she fit into and coming up empty. "We're fine," he said. Elias, who'd been eating at the head of the table without comment, set down his fork. "Speak for yourself, Frank. I'll take 2 more." Frank's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Mara brought the biscuits to Elias, who took them without looking at her. The meal continued in uncomfortable silence until the men finished and filed out to start the day's work. Mara was clearing plates when Frank approached the kitchen. "A word," he said. Mara set down the dishes. "Of course." He glanced toward the door, making sure they were alone. "You need to understand something. The last 3 cooks we had all lasted less than a month. You know why? No. Because they got ideas. Thought they could change things. Thought being able to cook a decent meal meant they had a say in how this place runs." He stepped closer. "You seem capable enough. Don't ruin it by overstepping." Mara met his eyes. "I'm just here to cook." "Good. Keep it that way." He turned to leave, then paused. "And tell Carter to keep his sentiments to himself. We don't need that kind of softness around here. Carter's comments are his own. I can't control what he says." Frank's expression darkened. "You're a woman in a house full of men. Everything you do affects how they act. Remember that." He left before she could respond. Mara stood in the empty kitchen, anger simmering in her chest. She'd been here 3 days. 3 days of getting up before dawn, cooking 3 meals, cleaning a kitchen that had been neglected for months, and staying out of everyone's way. And still it wasn't enough. Still, she was a problem that needed managing. She took a breath and went back to the dishes. Getting angry wouldn't help. She just needed to make it 4 more days. That afternoon, while the men were out working, Mara took stock of the pantry properly for the first time. What she found was worse than she'd thought. Half the supplies were improperly stored. Flour crawling with weevils, dried beans so old they'd never soften, preserved vegetables that had gone bad months ago. Someone had been buying supplies without any knowledge of how to keep them, and the waste was staggering. She spent 2 hours sorting through everything, separating usable from ruined. By the end, she had 3 piles, one to keep, one to salvage if possible, and one that needed to be thrown out immediately. The throw-out pile was bigger than the other 2 combined. She was hauling the spoiled food to the burn pit behind the barn when she heard voices. 2 men stood near the horse corral, speaking in low tones. She recognized Frank's voice immediately. "Don't care how good she cooks. Having a woman here changes things." "She hasn't caused any problems." That was a different voice, unfamiliar. "Yet, but she will. They always do." "Frank, you're being paranoid." "Am I? You remember Martha? Started off just fine. Then 3 weeks in, she was telling Rourke how to run the ranch. Took another month before he'd had enough and sent her packing. Martha was pushy. This one seems different. They all seemed different at first. Frank's tone turned bitter. My wife seemed different too. Right up until she decided I wasn't good enough and left for some merchant in Denver. Women are the same everywhere. They come in sweet and leave you gutted. There was a long pause. That was 10 years ago, Frank. Doesn't make it less true. Mara stood frozen, the sack of spoiled food heavy in her arms. She should move, should make noise so they'd know she was there. But something kept her still. Boss seems fine with her, the other man said. Boss is desperate. We haven't had a decent cook in months and winter's coming. He'll tolerate her until he finds someone better. Or until she proves herself. She won't. None of them do. Give it another week. She'll either quit or do something stupid enough to get fired. Then we can get back to normal. Mara forced herself to move, making her footsteps loud and obvious. The conversation stopped immediately. When she rounded the corner of the barn, both men looked at her with expressions that confirmed they knew exactly what she'd heard. She walked past them without speaking, dumped the spoiled food in the burn pit, and headed back to the house. Behind her, Frank said something too quiet to make out, and the other man laughed. That night, Mara made stew for dinner. Nothing fancy, just beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions cooked low and slow. But she'd learned over the years that simple food done right beat complicated food done poorly, and these men needed substance more than spectacle. They ate in their usual silence. Mara had started to recognize the patterns. Carter always took seconds of everything. A man called Jensen never touched vegetables unless they were mixed into something else, and Elias ate methodically, cleaning his plate without comment but never asking for more. Frank ate like he was angry at the food. When the meal ended and the men dispersed, Mara was scraping plates when Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway. The pantry looks different, he said. Mara kept working. I reorganized it. A lot of the supplies were spoiled. How much? About 40%. His jaw tightened. That much? They weren't stored properly. Weevils in the flour, mold on the beans, preserved goods gone bad. Whoever was buying supplies didn't know how to keep them. That would be me. Mara looked up, surprised. You were doing the supply runs? No one else knows the route. He leaned against the door frame, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked almost tired. I know cattle and timber. Food supplies aren't exactly my area of expertise. I noticed. A ghost of something crossed his face. Might have been amusement, might have been irritation. You have a solution or just criticism? Give me the supply list and the budget. I'll plan better. Why should I trust you with that? Because I just saved you 40% waste. And because if you want me to cook properly, I need proper ingredients. She set down the plate she'd been washing. You're paying for food that's rotting in the pantry. That's money thrown away. He studied her for a long moment. The old man who sent you here said you were stubborn. He said that? Among other things. Elias straightened up. Fine. You get the supply list, but you make the order work within budget. I'm not paying extra because you want fancy ingredients. I don't want fancy. I want functional. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. Frank talked to you this morning. It wasn't a question. Mara chose her words carefully. He expressed some concerns about you overstepping. Yes. Are you planning to overstep? I'm planning to cook, that's all. Elias nodded slowly. Frank's a good foreman. Best I've ever had. But he's got sharp edges when it comes to women. His wife left him badly, and he hasn't forgotten it. I gathered that. He'll come around once he sees you're not like her. And if he doesn't? Then he'll keep his opinions to himself and do his job, same as everyone else. Elias met her eyes. You've made it 3 days. That's longer than the last cook. Keep going like this and you'll have more than Frank's respect. You'll have his acceptance. Eventually. He left before she could respond. That night, lying on the narrow bed in the small room off the kitchen, Mara thought about Frank's words. They all seemed different at first. She wondered what Martha had done that made Elias send her away. Wondered if Frank was right, if she'd eventually do something that crossed an invisible line she couldn't see. She'd spent her whole adult life trying to fit into spaces that were never quite the right size. Trying to be the wife Thomas needed, the mother her children deserved, the widow who grieved properly and quietly. And she'd failed at all of it in small ways that added up. Maybe that's what Frank saw in her. The inevitable failure. The woman who'd start out fine and end up gone. But Mara had walked 30 miles to get here. She'd climbed a mountain with nothing but a skillet and a wooden spoon. She'd stood in that auction yard and watched strangers take everything she'd ever owned, and she'd survived it. She could survive Frank's skepticism, too. Day 4 brought its own challenges. Carter came to breakfast with a black eye and split lip. When Mara asked what happened, Frank cut in before the young man could answer. He got into it with Davies last night. Nothing that concerns you. Carter looked down at his plate, jaw tight. Davies, a heavy-set man who sat 3 seats down, smirked into his coffee. I'm just saying, Carter muttered. He was out of line. And I'm saying you handled it poorly, Frank shot back. You want to pick fights, do it on your own time. I wasn't picking a fight. I was defending. Enough. Elias's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. Both of you. Whatever happened is done. We have work today that needs doing. I don't care about last night's drama. The table fell silent. Mara served the rest of breakfast without comment, but she noticed the way Carter kept glancing at Davies, anger simmering in his eyes. And she noticed the way Davies seemed pleased with himself, like he'd won something. After breakfast, while Mara was washing dishes, Carter appeared in the kitchen. I'm sorry about that, he said quietly. The arguing at the table. I know it's not appropriate. It's not my place to judge. Still, he shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Davies was saying things last night about you. I told him to stop and he took a swing at me. Mara's hand stilled in the dishwater. What kind of things? Carter's face reddened. Just stupid talk. The kind men say when they're drunk and bored. I shouldn't have engaged with it. But you did. Yeah, I did. He met her eyes. My ma raised me better than to let that kind of talk slide, even if it got me a black eye. Mara felt something warm in her chest, gratitude mixed with concern. You don't have to defend me, Carter. I know. But someone should. He started to leave, then turned back. You're doing a good job here. Don't let Frank or anyone else tell you different. He was gone before she could respond. That afternoon, Davies cornered her near the woodshed. She'd gone out to split kindling for the stove and didn't hear him approach until he was right behind her. You're causing trouble, he said. Mara turned slowly, axe still in her hand. I'm splitting wood. You know what I mean. Got Carter all worked up defending your honor like some kind of knight. Davies stepped closer, and Mara could smell the whiskey on him despite it being barely past noon. You think you're special because you can cook? You're just another woman passing through, and pretty soon you'll be gone like the rest. Then why do you care? Because while you're here, you're making things complicated. Young pups like Carter start getting ideas, start thinking maybe they should be gentlemen instead of workers. He sneered. This is a ranch, not a parlor. We don't need you making it soft. Mara gripped the axe handle tighter. You finished? For now. He looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. But you watch yourself. Accidents happen out here, especially to people who don't belong. He walked away, and Mara stood there shaking, not with fear, but with rage. She'd dealt with men like Davies before. Men who saw women as problems or possessions, nothing in between. Men who thought their discomfort was more important than her existence. She split the rest of the kindling with perhaps more force than necessary, each strike of the axe releasing some of the tension coiled in her shoulders. That night's dinner was tense. Carter ate quickly and left. Davies lingered, watching her with a smirk every time she brought food to the table. Frank seemed oblivious to the undercurrent, focused on discussing the next day's work with Elias. After the meal, Elias asked her to stay behind after the men left. Davies bothering you? He asked once they were alone. Mara weighed her answer. He made his opinions clear this afternoon. Which were? That I don't belong here and should leave. Elias's expression darkened. He say anything else? Nothing specific, just general unpleasantness. If he threatens you directly, you tell me. I can handle Davies. I'm sure you can. But this is my ranch, and I won't have my workers harassing my cook. He stood. You're doing good work here, Mrs. Ellison. Don't let Davies make you think otherwise. It was the first time he'd called her by name. The formality of it, Mrs. Ellison, struck her as both respectful and distant, like he was acknowledging her as a person while keeping a careful boundary between them. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and left, and Mara went back to cleaning up, turning the conversation over in her mind. Day 5 started before dawn with a problem. The stove wouldn't light properly. Mara spent 20 minutes trying to coax it to life before accepting that something was genuinely wrong. The damper was stuck, the flue clogged with ash, and without proper airflow, the fire wouldn't catch. She'd have to fix it, or there'd be no breakfast. She grabbed tools from the shed and got to work, disassembling the damper mechanism and clearing the flue. It was dirty, frustrating work, and by the time she got the stove functioning again, she was covered in soot and running 30 minutes behind schedule. The men came in at 5 to find breakfast not ready. The silence in the dining room was heavy with judgment. Frank looked at his pocket watch. "We start work at 6. If we don't eat now—" "I know," Mara interrupted from the kitchen. "The stove was broken. It's fixed now. Food will be ready in 10 minutes. 10 minutes means we eat standing up and leave." "Then eat standing up and leave. I'm not serving half-cooked food because you can't wait." The room went dead quiet. Even through the kitchen doorway, Mara could feel the shock of her response. Women didn't snap at men like that. Women apologized and scrambled and made excuses. But Mara was too tired and too frustrated to care about protocol. Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What did you just say to me?" Mara didn't look up from the stove. "I said the food will be ready when it's ready. The stove was broken. I fixed it. Now I'm cooking breakfast. If that's not acceptable, you're welcome to cook it yourself." "You're out of line, and you're in my kitchen. Either wait or leave, but stop standing there making it harder for me to work." For a moment, she thought he might actually throw her out right then. She could see him calculating, weighing his authority against the practical reality that they had no other cook. Then Elias's voice came from the dining room. "Frank, let her work." Frank's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. 10 minutes later, Mara served breakfast. The eggs were perfect, the bacon crisp, the biscuits hot from the oven. She'd made the 10-minute deadline. The men ate quickly and left without comment. But as Carter passed the kitchen, he caught her eye and gave a small nod, something between respect and solidarity. After they were gone, Mara sat down heavily in a chair, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. She'd just talked back to the foreman of the ranch. She'd essentially told him to get out of her way or shut up. That was exactly the kind of overstepping Frank had warned her about. But the stove had been broken, the food needed cooking, and she'd done her job despite the obstacles. If that was overstepping, then so be it. Later that afternoon, she was kneading bread dough when Elias came in through the back door. "The stove," he said. "What was wrong with it?" Mara explained the damper issue. He listened, then examined the stove himself, checking her repair work. "You fixed this yourself?" No one else was available. Most cooks would have just said it was broken and left it. Most cooks probably have husbands or ranch hands to fix things for them. She shaped the dough into loaves. "I don't have that luxury." He was quiet for a moment. "Frank said you were disrespectful this morning." "Frank said I was out of line for not apologizing for something that wasn't my fault." "That's not quite how he phrased it." "I'm sure it's not." Mara set the loaves aside to rise. "Look, Mr. Rourke, you hired me to cook. I'm cooking, but I can't do it properly if the equipment breaks and I'm expected to serve food anyway and apologize for the delay. If that's what you want, you need a different kind of woman than me." "What kind of woman are you?" "The kind who fixes the damn stove and gets breakfast on the table. Not the kind who cries about it and waits for rescue." She expected anger. Instead, something shifted in his expression. Might have been approval, might have been surprise. "Frank thinks you're trouble," he said. "Frank thinks all women are trouble." "You're not wrong." Elias leaned against the counter. "But he's not entirely wrong either. The last cook we had, Martha, she started off capable. Then she decided she knew better than everyone else about everything. Tried to reorganize the whole operation, told the men how to do their jobs, undermined Frank's authority at every turn. It caused chaos. I'm not Martha." "No, you're not." He straightened up. "But you need to understand the balance here. These men live and work in close quarters, months at a time. Hierarchy matters. Respect matters. If they see you challenging Frank openly, it creates problems. Even when Frank's wrong? Especially then, because if you challenge him and I back you up, he loses face. If I back him up, you lose ground. Either way, someone ends up resentful. Mara wiped flour from her hands. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept whatever he says? No, but pick your battles carefully. And when you do push back, do it in a way that doesn't back him into a corner. Elias moved toward the door, then paused. You've got 2 days left in your trial week. You're doing good work. Don't ruin it by making this personal with Frank. He left, and Mara stood alone in the kitchen, frustrated and conflicted. She understood what he was saying, understood the politics of it, the careful navigation required, but she'd spent her whole life being careful, being accommodating, swallowing her words to keep the peace. And where had it gotten her? Widowed, penniless, walking 30 miles through mountains because every door had closed. Maybe being careful wasn't the answer anymore. Day 6 brought a strange shift in the atmosphere. The men were quieter at breakfast, almost subdued. Even Davies seemed less antagonistic than usual. Mara couldn't figure out why until Carter stopped by the kitchen after the meal. Storm coming, he said. Should hit tonight or tomorrow morning. Big one, from the way the sky looks. Mara glanced out the window. The clouds were heavy and dark, sitting low over the mountains. How bad? Bad enough. We're securing everything today. Livestock in the barns, equipment stored, windows shuttered. Probably won't be able to work outside for a couple of days once it hits. What do I need to do? Make sure there's enough food ready. Once the storm starts, nobody's going to want to wait for cooking. Usually we eat whatever can be served cold or reheated quickly. He hesitated. And stay inside once it starts. The wind up here can be dangerous. After he left, Mara took inventory of what she had and what she could prepare in advance. She spent the day cooking, 2 large pots of stew, 3 batches of biscuits, cornbread, beans, enough to feed 13 men for at least 2 days without her needing to do anything but reheat. The men came in at irregular intervals throughout the afternoon, bringing in supplies, boarding up windows, moving animals. The ranch transformed from a working operation into something buttoned down and defensive, preparing for siege. By evening, the first snow had started. Not the gentle flakes Mara remembered from winters back east, but hard, driving ice that hit the windows like thrown sand. Dinner was tense. The men ate quickly, focused on finishing their preparations. Elias outlined the plan, shifts to check on the animals during the storm, emergency supplies ready in case anyone got trapped in the barns overnight, everyone staying close to the main house when possible. How long do these storms usually last? Mara asked. Anywhere from a day to a week, Frank said. Depends on how the wind moves. Could blow through fast or settle in and bury us. Cheerful. It's the mountains. Weather doesn't care about your feelings. After dinner, Mara prepared the kitchen for the storm, securing loose items, setting aside candles and matches in case the lamps failed, making sure there was enough water stored. The wind was already howling around the house, and through the walls she could hear the creak and groan of wood under pressure. She was banking the fire in the stove when someone knocked on the back door. She opened it to find Carter, snow-covered and shivering. "Boss says you should stay in the main house tonight," he shouted over the wind. "Your room off the kitchen isn't insulated enough. You'll freeze." "Where should I go?" "There's a spare room upstairs, second door on the right, already made up." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing back into the storm. Mara grabbed her few belongings and made her way upstairs. The main house was larger than she'd realized. She'd only ever been in the kitchen and dining room. The upstairs hallway was dim, lit by a single lamp, and the spare room Carter mentioned was small but warm, with a real bed and actual blankets. It felt almost luxurious after 6 nights on a cot. She'd just settled in when the storm hit in earnest. The wind became a roar, shaking the entire house. Snow battered the windows so hard she thought the glass might break. Somewhere below she heard shouting, men calling to each other, organizing, responding to some crisis she couldn't see. She went to the window and looked out, but visibility was almost zero. Just white chaos and darkness. This was going to be a long night. Around midnight, unable to sleep with the storm raging, Mara went downstairs. The main room was empty, the fire burning low. She added wood, then stood warming her hands, listening to the house settle around her. "Can't sleep either?" She turned to find Elias coming down the stairs. He'd obviously been trying to rest but failing. His hair was disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his feet bare. The storm's loud, she said. You get used to it. He moved to the fire, standing opposite her. Or you don't. But either way, you stop letting it keep you awake. They stood in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. You've made it 6 days, he said finally. That's a record for this season. The week's not over yet. Tomorrow's the last day, and we'll probably be snowed in, which means no cooking needed beyond reheating what you've already made. He looked at her across the firelight. So yeah, you've made it. Does that mean you're offering me the permanent position? Depends. You want it? Mara thought about the question. 6 days ago, she'd been desperate enough to take anything, but now, having spent nearly a week here, she understood what accepting would mean. Long winters trapped on a mountain with men who barely tolerated her presence. Hard work with no days off. Isolation from anything resembling civilization. And Elias himself, this complicated, difficult man who ran his ranch like a general ran an army. But she also thought about the alternative. Walking back down that mountain to find another temporary job that might last a month if she was lucky. Starting over somewhere else with nothing but her skillet and her stubbornness. At least here, she'd proven herself. At least here, the work was steady. Yes, she said. I want it. He nodded slowly. $4 a week, plus room and board. Sundays off unless there's an emergency. Supply orders go through you, but I approve the final budget. You cook 3 meals a day for however many men are on the ranch at the time. Usually 13, sometimes more during harvest season. What about Frank? What about him? Is he going to be a problem? Elias was quiet for a moment. Frank's a problem with everything that doesn't fit his worldview, but he's professional enough to work with people he doesn't like. And if he crosses a line with you, you tell me. I can handle Frank. I believe you, but this is still my ranch, and I won't have my people, any of my people, being harassed by other workers. He met her eyes. You're not alone here, Mrs. Ellison. Remember that. It was the first time since Thomas died that anyone had said something like that to her. The first time someone had implied she had backup, support, someone in her corner. She didn't know what to say. Thank you, she finally managed. He nodded and headed back upstairs, leaving her alone with the fire and the storm and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being somewhere she might actually belong. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that sounded like the mountain itself was screaming. 3 days of snow that piled so high against the buildings they had to dig tunnels just to reach the barns. 3 days of the men rotating shifts, checking livestock, breaking ice in water troughs, making sure nothing collapsed under the weight. Mara kept the kitchen running. She reheated stew, made fresh coffee every few hours, kept bread available for men coming in frozen and exhausted. The work was constant but manageable, and somewhere in those 3 days of forced proximity, something shifted. The men started talking to her. Not much, just small exchanges, brief conversations while they warmed themselves by the stove. Jensen mentioned he had a sister back in Missouri. Carter talked about learning to ride horses as a boy. Even Frank grudgingly asked her opinion on whether the salt pork needed replacing. By the time the storm broke on the 4th morning, Mara realized she'd stopped feeling like an outsider. She wasn't exactly part of the crew. That would take longer, maybe forever. But she wasn't an enemy anymore either. She was just the cook, a fixture. Someone who belonged in the kitchen the same way Frank belonged in the foreman's office. The day after the storm, Elias found her in the pantry taking inventory. Supply runs in 2 days, he said. You have that list ready? Mara handed him a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting. He scanned it, eyebrows rising. This is half what we usually order. Because half of what you usually order goes to waste. I wrote down what we actually need, properly stored, with measurements that'll last exactly 4 weeks. No excess, no shortage. He studied the list more carefully. You calculated this down to the pound. I calculated it down to the meal. 13 men, 3 meals a day, 28 days, plus 10% buffer for waste and unexpected guests. What if we get more workers? Then I adjust. But right now, this is what we need. He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. You realize this makes you more valuable than just a cook. How so? Most people I hire do 1 job. You're doing 3. Cooking, inventory management, and apparently supply logistics. You want me to stop? Hell no, I'm just noting it. He leaned against the door frame. Frank mentioned you've been different since the storm. More settled, he said. Frank said that? In his own way. What he actually said was, you've stopped being irritating, which from Frank is practically a compliment. Mara couldn't help but smile. I'll take it. You should. It means you're staying past the trial week. He straightened up. Welcome to the permanent crew, Mrs. Ellison. He left before she could respond, but Mara stood in the pantry feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Security. She had a job, a real job with steady pay and a place to sleep and work that mattered. For the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't just surviving day to day. She was building something. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Wake at 4:30, start the stove, make breakfast. Clean up, start prep for lunch. Serve lunch, clean up, start dinner. Serve dinner, clean up, collapse into bed. Repeat. It was exhausting, relentless work, but it was hers. The men continued warming to her in increments. Davies still kept his distance, watching her with something between suspicion and resentment, but he stopped making comments. Carter became almost friendly, sometimes staying after meals to help with dishes without being asked. Jensen started requesting specific meals, and when Mara made them, he'd nod his approval like she'd passed some kind of test. Frank remained frank, gruff, skeptical, keeping her at arm's length. But he stopped challenging her openly, and when she asked about supply deliveries or work schedules that might affect meal times, he answered without hostility. And Elias. Elias was harder to read. He came to every meal but rarely spoke during them. He'd thank her for the food, occasionally comment on something specific, but mostly he ate in silence while the other men talked around him. After dinner, he'd often disappear to his office, a small room off the main house where he kept records and handled the ranch's business. But sometimes, maybe once every few days, he'd linger after the others left. He'd stand in the kitchen doorway while Mara cleaned up, asking questions that seemed casual but felt weighted. How was she settling in? Did she need anything? Were the men treating her fairly? She got the sense he was checking on her without wanting to seem like he was checking on her. Like he was trying to make sure she wasn't another Martha, wasn't someone who'd cause problems or break under the isolation. She tried to give him answers that were honest without being complaints. Yes, she was settling in. No, she didn't need anything. The men were fine, mostly. What she didn't tell him was that the isolation was harder than she'd expected. That some nights she lay in bed listening to the wind and feeling the weight of being the only woman in a house full of men. That she missed having someone to really talk to, not just exchange practical information with. But those weren't his problems to solve. She'd chosen this. She'd have to live with it. 6 weeks in, a traveling merchant arrived with the monthly supply delivery. He was a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Coleman and seemed surprised to find a woman answering the kitchen door. "Where's Rourke?" he asked. "In the barn. I can sign for the supplies." Coleman hesitated. "You're the new cook?" "Yes." "Huh. You're lasting longer than most." He started unloading crates. Martha made it 5 weeks. The one before her didn't even finish the trial week. Mara began checking items against her list. What happened to them? Martha got into it with Rourke about something. Never heard the full story. The other one just left one morning. Didn't even say why. He set down a barrel of flour. "This place eats people. The isolation gets to them, or Rourke's moods do, or they just can't handle the work. No offense, but I'll be surprised if you're still here next time I come through." "I'll take that bet." He laughed. "You got spine, I'll give you that. But spine isn't always enough up here." They finished unloading in silence. As Coleman was preparing to leave, Elias emerged from the barn. "Everything in order?" he called. "Ask your cook," Coleman replied. "She's the one who checked it." Elias looked at Mara, who nodded. "All here. Quality's good." "Prices went up," Coleman added. 10% across the board. Winter shortage. Elias's jaw tightened. "That wasn't in your letter." "Wasn't finalized when I sent it, but that's the rate now. Take it or go without. Or I find another supplier." "Good luck with that. I'm the only one who runs this route regular. Everyone else charges double for the distance." They stared at each other, tension crackling in the cold air. Finally, Elias said, "Fine, but the rate holds for the next 3 months. I'm not paying increases every delivery." "Deal." Coleman climbed onto his wagon. "Nice meeting you, Mrs. Cook. Hope you're still here in April." He left, and Elias turned to Mara. You actually checked everything? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Most people just trust the supplier. Most people probably haven't been cheated before. Something flickered in his expression. You have been. Once. Thomas ordered lumber for a barn repair, and the merchant shorted us by 30%. By the time we realized, he was long gone, and we had to make do with what we had. She started carrying crates toward the kitchen. I learned to count everything twice. Elias grabbed 2 crates and followed her. Coleman's right about the isolation. It gets to people. So I've heard. You feeling it yet? Mara set down her crates and turned to face him. I'm feeling a lot of things, Mr. Rourke. Isolated is pretty far down the list. What's at the top? Tired, busy, occasionally frustrated with men who think I'm going to break and run any day. She met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. The sooner everyone accepts that, the easier this gets. He studied her for a long moment. You're different from Martha. So I've been told. Martha wanted to change everything, wanted the ranch to run the way she thought it should, with her in charge of more than just the kitchen. He set down his crates. She thought because she could cook, she could manage. But cooking and managing are different skills. I know that. Do you? Because you've been handling inventory and supply orders like you're running logistics. You told me to handle supplies. I told you to plan orders. I didn't tell you to negotiate with Coleman or check every crate or reorganize the entire pantry system. His tone wasn't angry, just observant. You're expanding your role without asking. Mara felt heat rise in her face. Would you rather I didn't? Rather I let Coleman short us on supplies and waste your money on spoiled goods? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Elias was quiet for a moment, like he was trying to find the right words. I'm saying you're capable, more capable than I expected. But capability without boundaries can become a problem, and I need to know you understand the difference between doing your job well and trying to do everyone else's job too. I'm cooking and managing supplies. That's it. I'm not telling Frank how to run the crew or you how to run the ranch. Not yet. The implication hung between them. Not yet, but maybe eventually. Maybe she'd become another Martha, pushing into spaces that weren't hers, causing the kind of friction that ended with her leaving. Mara took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I'm not Martha, and I'm not my husband either. Thomas was good at building things, but terrible at planning. I spent 15 years watching him start projects without enough materials or money or time, then scrambling to make it work. I learned to plan ahead, to count carefully, to waste nothing because we couldn't afford waste. She gestured at the crates. That's all I'm doing here, making sure we have what we need when we need it, without waste. If that's overstepping, tell me now and I'll stop. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. It's not overstepping, but I needed to know you understand the line. I do. Good. He picked up his crates again. And for what it's worth, you're doing a hell of a job. The kitchen hasn't run this smoothly in years. It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. Coming from Elias Rourke, it felt like a victory. That night at dinner, Davies broke the routine. He'd been quiet for weeks, ever since his confrontation with Carter, eating his meals in silence and avoiding Mara entirely. But tonight, as she served the main course, he spoke up. This beef is tough. The table went quiet. Mara paused. It's the same cut we've had all week. Well, it's tough tonight. Then chew more. Several men suppressed smiles. Davies' face reddened. You getting smart with me? I'm telling you how to solve your problem. The beef is cooked properly. If you find it tough, that's a chewing issue, not a cooking issue. Maybe you just don't know how to cook beef. Maybe you just like complaining. Frank cleared his throat. Davies, drop it. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No, Carter interrupted. You're saying what you're thinking. Everyone else is eating fine. Davies looked around the table, finding no support. Even the men who'd been neutral toward Mara seemed irritated with him. Whatever, he muttered. Food's still tough. Elias set down his fork with enough force that the sound carried through the room. Davies, you got a problem with the cooking. You can make your own meals. Otherwise, shut up and eat. Davies opened his mouth, then closed it. The message was clear. Push this further and face consequences. He finished his meal in sullen silence. After dinner, as the men filed out, Frank stopped by the kitchen. Davies is looking for trouble, he said. Don't give it to him. I'm not giving him anything. He came at me. And you came back at him. In front of the whole crew. Frank's expression was hard to read. You won that exchange. But winning doesn't always mean you're better off. What's that supposed to mean? It means Davies has pride and not much else. You embarrassed him tonight, and men like that don't forget. He moved toward the door, then paused. Watch yourself. Pride makes people stupid. He left, and Mara stood in the kitchen feeling uneasy. She'd defended herself, same as she'd been doing since she arrived. But Frank's warning rattled her. She'd dealt with difficult men before, but always with Thomas nearby as a buffer. Here, she had no buffer. Just her words and whatever backup Elias might provide if things got bad. The next day, while kneading bread, Carter came in looking worried. Davies is spreading talk, he said quietly. Mara didn't look up from the dough. What kind of talk? Saying you're getting special treatment, that Rourke's playing favorites because you're a woman. He shifted uncomfortably. It's garbage, but some of the newer guys are listening. And what do you think? I think Davies is bitter because you made him look stupid, but that doesn't mean the talk won't cause problems. Mara shaped the dough into loaves. Let him talk. I know what I'm doing, and so does Rourke. Yeah, but... Carter hesitated. It's not just about the work. When men get certain ideas about a woman, especially when there's only one woman around, it can get ugly. Mara finally looked up. You worry Davies is going to try something. I'm worried he's going to create an atmosphere where someone might, or where the crew starts dividing up over stupid gossip. He met her eyes. I've seen it happen. Ranch down in Colorado, they had a woman cook for a season. Some of the men decided she was causing trouble just by existing, made her life hell until she left. I'm not leaving. I know. That's why I'm telling you this. He glanced toward the door. Just be careful. And if Davies or anyone else makes you uncomfortable, tell Rourke, or tell me. Don't try to handle it alone. After he left, Mara stood at the counter, hands dusty with flour, thinking about what he'd said. She'd been so focused on proving she could do the work that she hadn't fully considered the other dynamics at play. The gender politics, the resentments, the way her mere presence changed the atmosphere whether she wanted it to or not. She'd thought that by keeping her head down and doing good work, she'd earn acceptance. But maybe acceptance wasn't possible. Maybe the best she could hope for was tolerance, and even that was fragile. That night she was banking the stove when Elias appeared. Heard Davies is running his mouth, he said. News travels fast. Carter told me. He's worried about you. I noticed. Elias leaned against the counter. Davies is a decent worker, but a terrible person. He's been with me 3 years, and in that time, he's had problems with half the crew at some point. Usually, I let it play out. Men work through their issues, or one of them leaves, but this is different. Because I'm a woman. Because you're my employee, and he's creating a hostile work environment. Gender's got nothing to do with it. Mara doubted that, but didn't argue. What are you going to do? Talk to him. Make it clear that spreading gossip about any crew member is grounds for termination. If he keeps it up, he's gone. And if firing him makes things worse, makes the other men think I ran crying to you? Elias frowned. You didn't run crying anywhere. Carter reported a problem, and I'm addressing it. The men won't see it that way. They'll see Davies getting fired right after I had a confrontation with him. She turned to face him fully. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but sometimes helping makes things harder. So what do you want me to do? Nothing? I want you to let me handle Davies my own way. Which is? Ignore him. Keep doing my job. Let his own bitterness eat him up while I stay productive. She crossed her arms. Men like Davies want a reaction. They want drama, want attention, want to feel important. If I refuse to give him any of that, he'll either move on or make a mistake big enough that you can fire him for something concrete. Elias studied her. You've dealt with men like him before. My whole life has been dealing with men like him. Men who resent women for existing in spaces they think we shouldn't occupy. She felt the old anger rising but kept her voice level. You can't fix that by stepping in. You can only prove you trust me to handle it myself. He was quiet for a long moment. All right, but if he crosses a line, threatens you, touches you, anything that's more than talk, you tell me immediately. That's not negotiable. Agreed. And I'm still talking to him. Not about you specifically, but about the general rules on gossip and harassment. He needs to know I'm watching." Mara nodded. It was probably the best compromise she'd get. After Elias left, she finished her work and headed upstairs. The house was quiet, most of the men already asleep. She passed Frank's room and heard the scratch of a pen. He was probably working on the next day's assignments. Jensen's room was dark. Carter showed a light under the door. Her own room felt like a refuge. Small, simple, but hers. She lit the lamp and sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The conversation with Elias had drained her more than a full day's cooking. She'd told him she could handle Davies, and she believed it. But the truth was, she was tired of having to handle men like him. Tired of proving herself over and over, tired of walking careful lines, tired of being the problem just by existing. She thought about Thomas, how he'd never really understood this kind of exhaustion, how he'd thought respect was something you earned through hard work, not something you had to fight for just to be seen as human. He'd been a good man, but he'd lived in a different world, a world where his presence was expected, welcomed, normal. Mara's presence was none of those things, and probably never would be. But she'd survived worse than Davies. She'd survived loss, grief, poverty, and 30 miles of mountain wilderness. She could survive one bitter man's resentment. She had to. The next week passed without incident. Davies kept his distance and his mouth shut. The other men stayed neutral. Work continued. Mara threw herself into the cooking with renewed focus. She started experimenting with recipes, using the supplies more creatively. Roasted root vegetables with herbs she'd found dried in the pantry. Braised beef that fell apart with a fork. Fresh bread every morning, still warm when the men sat down. The quality of the meals improved noticeably, and even the men who'd been indifferent started commenting. Jensen mentioned the food was better than his wife's cooking. Frank actually smiled when she served pot roast with gravy. Carter asked if she could teach him to make biscuits that light. And Elias started staying longer after meals. Not every night, but several times a week. He'd find reasons to linger in the kitchen while Mara cleaned. He'd ask about her plans for the next day's menu, or comment on how the supplies were holding up, or mention some detail about the ranch's operations. The conversations were still guarded, professional. But there was something underneath them now, a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. A recognition that they were both trying to run operations smoothly in a place that made smooth operations nearly impossible. One night, about 8 weeks into her tenure, he asked a different kind of question. "You ever regret coming here?" Mara was washing dishes, hands deep in hot water. She considered lying, then decided against it. "Sometimes, when the isolation gets heavy, or when I'm dealing with Davies' attitude, or when I'm just tired and wish someone else could take over for a night." "But you stay." "Because the alternative is worse." She rinsed a plate and set it aside. "Out there, I'm nothing. A widow with no prospects, no family, no options. Here, I'm at least useful. I'm feeding people, managing resources, contributing to something that functions. That matters more than comfort." "That's a lonely way to look at it." "Maybe, but it's honest." Elias was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I regret things too. Choices I made that seemed right at the time but turned out wrong. People I let down. Opportunities I missed." Mara glanced at him. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. "We all have regrets," she said. "The question is whether we let them bury us or push us forward. Which are you doing?" "Both, probably. Some days I'm burying them. Other days they're fuel." She dried her hands and turned to face him. "What about you?" He didn't answer immediately. Just stood there, backlit by the lamp, his expression unreadable. "I'm still figuring that out," he finally said. Then he left, and Mara stood alone in the kitchen, wondering what story he was carrying that made him ask questions like that, wondering what had happened in his past to put that particular weight in his voice. But those weren't her questions to ask. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She finished cleaning and went to bed, her mind full of half-formed thoughts about regret and resilience and the strange, complicated man who ran this ranch like a fortress against the world. 2 months in, the temperature dropped hard enough that water froze in the pipes overnight. Mara woke to find the kitchen pump solid, no water coming through, no matter how hard she worked the handle. She'd have to melt snow for cooking, which meant breakfast would be late and the men would be irritable. She was hauling the third bucket of snow inside when Davies appeared in the doorway. "Pump's frozen," she said before he could comment. "I'm working on it." "Working on it how? Melting snow one bucket at a time?" He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "That'll take all morning." "You have a better idea?" "Yeah. Don't let the pump freeze in the first place." Mara set down the bucket harder than necessary. "The pump was fine yesterday. Temperature dropped overnight. Unless you expect me to stay up all night keeping water running, I'm not sure what you think I should have done differently." A competent person would have anticipated it. A competent person would be helping instead of criticizing. Davies pushed off the doorframe. "I'm not your assistant, and I'm not your target, so either help or get out of my kitchen." They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Frank's voice came from behind Davies. "Davies! Barn! Now!" Davies turned, saw Frank's expression, and left without another word. Frank stepped into the kitchen, looked at the buckets of snow, then at Mara. "You need help getting that pump working?" The offer surprised her. "I can manage." Didn't ask if you could manage, asked if you need help. He moved past her to examine the pump. "Davies is right about one thing. This'll take forever if you're melting snow. We need to thaw the pipe." He disappeared outside and returned 5 minutes later with a blowtorch and several old rags. While Mara continued prepping breakfast with melted snow, Frank worked on the frozen section of pipe, carefully heating it until water started flowing again. "There," he said, testing the pump. Water came through clean and cold. "Should hold now, as long as the temperature doesn't drop further." "Thank you." Frank wiped his hands on a rag. "Davies is looking for any excuse to undermine you. Don't give him ammunition by having kitchen failures he can point to. The frozen pipe wasn't a failure, it was weather. To you and me, sure. To Davies, it's proof you're not cut out for this." He headed for the door. "Just be aware. He's watching everything you do, waiting for you to slip." After he left, Mara stood by the now working pump, processing what had just happened. Frank had helped her. Actually helped, without being asked, and then warned her about Davies. It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd gotten from him. Maybe she was finally breaking through. Breakfast was only 15 minutes late, and the men ate without complaint. Davies sat at the far end of the table, barely touching his food, radiating resentment. But he didn't say anything, and neither did anyone else. After the meal, Carter hung back while the others left. "Frank helped you with the pump," he said. "He did. That's big. Frank doesn't help people unless he respects them." Carter grinned. "You've been here 2 months and you got Frank on your side. That's got to be some kind of record." "I'm not sure he's on my side. He just doesn't want the kitchen to fail." "Same thing with Frank. His loyalty's to the ranch. If he thinks you're good for the ranch, he'll back you." Carter picked up his hat. "Just thought you should know. You're doing better than you probably realize." The day passed in its usual rhythm of cooking and cleaning. But Mara found her thoughts circling back to Frank's help and Carter's words. She'd been so focused on surviving, on proving she wouldn't quit, that she hadn't noticed the subtle shifts happening around her. The way the men had stopped questioning her presence. The way conversations at meals had started, including her peripherally. The way even Davies's hostility had become background noise rather than active threat. She wasn't exactly welcomed, but she was tolerated. And tolerance, in a place like this, was its own kind of victory. That evening, while preparing dinner, she heard shouting from outside. She went to the window and saw several men gathered near the horse corral, their voices raised. She couldn't make out words, but the body language was clear. An argument, getting heated. Then she saw Elias stride into the group, his voice cutting through the noise. Whatever he said ended the argument immediately. The men dispersed, heads down, and Elias stood alone in the corral for a long moment before heading back to the house. He came into the kitchen a few minutes later, tension radiating off him. "Everything all right?" Mara asked. "Fine." His tone said it wasn't fine. He moved to the stove, warming his hands. "Just men being stupid." "What happened?" Davies and Carter got into it, again. He rubbed his face tiredly. "Davies keeps pushing, Carter keeps taking the bait, and I'm tired of breaking up fights between grown men who should know better." "What were they fighting about?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. "You, mostly." Mara's stomach sank. "What about me?" "Davies said something about you getting special treatment." Carter called him out on it. Davies took a swing, Carter dodged and shoved him into a fence post. Elias's jaw tightened. I'm about 2 seconds from firing Davies, but we're short-handed and winter's not over. Can't afford to lose workers right now. So you're stuck with him. We're all stuck with him. He turned to face her. But this can't keep happening. Every other week there's some incident involving Davies and his attitude about you. It's disrupting the crew. What do you want me to do about it? Nothing. You're not the problem. He paused. But I need to know if you felt unsafe. If Davies has done anything beyond running his mouth. No, he keeps his distance mostly. Just makes comments. Because if he crosses that line, I know, you'll fire him. Mara set down the spoon she'd been using. But what happens after that? You fire Davies, and suddenly I'm the woman who got a man fired. The other men start wondering if they're next if they say the wrong thing. The whole dynamic shifts, and not in a good way. So what's the alternative? Let him keep causing problems? Let him make a mistake that has nothing to do with me. He's angry and stupid. He'll slip up eventually. She met his eyes. I appreciate you defending me, but sometimes the best defense is just letting an idiot be his own worst enemy. Elias studied her, and something in his expression softened slightly. You're more strategic than I gave you credit for. I've had to be. Women don't get the luxury of charging ahead and dealing with consequences later. We have to think 3 steps forward, always. That sounds exhausting. It is. He stayed in the kitchen while she finished dinner prep, a comfortable silence settling between them. It was strange, Mara thought, how she'd gone from finding his presence intimidating to finding it almost companionable. He wasn't warm, probably never would be, but he was steady, reliable, someone who kept his word and expected others to do the same. In a world that had proven unreliable at every turn, that mattered. Dinner that night was tense. Davies ate in sullen silence. Carter had a bruised cheek and wouldn't look at anyone. The other men kept their eyes on their plates, clearly uncomfortable. Halfway through the meal, Elias set down his fork with enough force that everyone looked up. I'm only saying this once, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We're a crew. That means we work together, eat together, and function as a unit. Personal disputes stay personal. They don't bleed into the work, and they sure as hell don't turn into fistfights in my corral. His gaze swept the table. Anyone who can't follow that rule can pack their things and leave. I don't care how good a worker you are. I need people who can handle themselves like adults. The silence was absolute. Understood? Elias asked. Murmurs of agreement around the table. Davies said nothing, just stared at his plate. Davies, Elias said. I asked if you understood. Davies looked up, jaw clenched. I understand. Good. Then we're done with this. Elias picked up his fork and went back to eating, conversation over. The rest of the meal passed without incident, but the atmosphere remained strained. When the men left, Mara started cleaning up, her hands working automatically while her mind processed what had happened. Elias had defended her without naming her, had shut down the conflict without making her the focal point. It was exactly what she'd asked for, and it had worked, for now. But she could feel the pressure building. Davies's resentment, Carter's protectiveness. The other men caught between wanting peace and taking sides. Something was going to break. She just didn't know what or when. 3 days later, the answer came. Mara was in the pantry organizing supplies when she heard the bell. 3 sharp rings that meant emergency. She dropped what she was holding and ran outside to find smoke rising from the main barn. Not just smoke. Flames, licking up the western wall where the hay was stored. Men were already running toward the barn, shouting. She saw Frank directing them, saw Carter and Jensen hauling buckets from the water trough. And she saw Elias, standing frozen near the barn entrance, staring at the fire with an expression of absolute horror. He wasn't moving, wasn't shouting orders, just standing there like his body had forgotten how to function. "Boss!" Frank yelled. "Boss, we need to organize!" But Elias didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear. The fire was spreading fast, climbing toward the roof. If it reached the loft where the dry hay was stored, the whole barn would go up. And with it, probably half the livestock and equipment they needed to survive the winter. Mara ran toward the barn, her mind racing. She'd dealt with barn fires before. Thomas's cousin had lost a barn to lightning, and she'd been there, had seen how fast things could spiral out of control. She reached Frank, grabbed his arm. "We need a bucket line from the pump to the barn." "Now." Frank stared at her. "That's not your— Elias isn't moving and we don't have time. Get the men in a line. Buckets from the pump, pass them forward, throw them on the base of the fire." For a split second, Frank hesitated. Then he seemed to realize she was right. Elias was frozen. Someone had to take charge, and Mara was the one doing it. "You heard her," he shouted to the men. "Bucket line. Carter, Jensen, Davies, get on the pump. Everyone else, form a line to the barn." The men scrambled into position. Mara ran to Elias, who was still standing motionless, his face white. "Elias," she said. Nothing. She grabbed his shoulders, forced him to look at her. "Elias, I need you to focus." His eyes were distant, haunted. "It's happening again," he whispered. "What's happening again?" "The fire. Just like before." She didn't have time to unpack that. "Listen to me. Your barn is burning. Your men need you. I need you to come back and help us." "I can't." "Yes, you can." She shook him slightly. "Whatever happened before, this is now. And now is when we fight. Do you understand?" Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just survival instinct kicking in. "The hayloft," he managed. "If the fire reaches it, then we stop it before it does. Come on." She pulled him toward the bucket line. The men were working frantically, passing buckets forward, throwing water on the flames. But it wasn't enough. The fire was too big, spreading too fast. "We need to soak the wall between the fire and the loft," Mara shouted. "Create a barrier so it can't climb." Elias seemed to shake off his paralysis. "She's right. Davies, Carter, focus everything on that wall section. Frank, get the animals out of the east stalls." "Already on it," Frank called back. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Water flying, smoke choking, men shouting. Mara stayed at the front of the line, directing the buckets where they were needed most. Her dress was soaked, her hands raw from rope burns, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation. But slowly, impossibly, they were winning. The flames on the lower wall started dying down. The soaked section between the fire and the hayloft held, creating a barrier the fire couldn't cross. Men pulled the last of the livestock out safely. And finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less than 30 minutes, the fire was out. The barn was damaged but standing, the hayloft intact, the animals safe. The men collapsed where they stood, exhausted and filthy. Mara leaned against a fence post, coughing, her whole body shaking from adrenaline. Elias approached her, his face still pale but present now, fully back. "You took charge," he said. "Someone had to. You organized the men." "They organized themselves. I just pointed them in the right direction." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated in his expression. "You shouldn't have had to. That was my job, and I froze. We can talk about why later. Right now we need to make sure the fire's actually out and assess the damage." He nodded and turned to the crew. "Frank, take 3 men and check every inch of that barn. Make sure there's no embers left burning. Jensen, count the livestock. Make sure we didn't lose any. Carter, check the equipment. See what's salvageable." The men moved to follow orders, and Elias turned back to Mara. "You should get inside. You look like you're about to collapse." "So do you." "I will. After I finish here." He paused. "Thank you. For pulling me back, for taking over when I couldn't." "Don't thank me yet. We still have to figure out how the fire started." "Lightning, probably. Storm last night was bad." But Mara had seen the burn pattern, the way the fire had started at ground level, not from above. Lightning strikes from the top down. This started at the wall. Elias's expression darkened. "You think someone set it. I think it's worth investigating." They found the evidence an hour later, a pile of oil-soaked rags stuffed between the barn wall boards, positioned exactly where the fire had started. Someone had deliberately tried to burn down the barn. Frank stared at the evidence, his face hard. "Who the hell would do this?" Elias's voice was cold as stone. "Davies." "You don't know that," Frank said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Don't I? He's been causing problems for months. Got into a fight 3 days ago. I told him to fall in line or leave." Elias turned to Frank. "Where is he?" Last I saw, he was helping with the bucket line. Find him. Now! But Davies was already gone. His bunk empty, his things missing. He'd slipped away during the chaos of the fire, and by the time they realized it, he had a solid hour's head start down the mountain. Should we go after him? Carter asked. Elias shook his head. Let him go. He's not worth the trouble. He looked at the damaged barn, then at his crew. Everyone get cleaned up and get some rest. We'll start repairs tomorrow. As the men dispersed, Mara found herself alone with Elias near the burn site. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ranch. Everything felt surreal. The near disaster, Davies's betrayal, the way Elias had frozen and she'd stepped in. You want to tell me what happened? She asked quietly. When you froze, you said it was happening again. Elias was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. 10 years ago, I had a wife and a daughter, 5 years old, red hair, laughed at everything. He stared at the damaged barn. We were living in Montana then. Smaller ranch, just getting started. One night, lightning hit the house, fire spread fast. I got my wife out, went back for my daughter. He stopped. Mara waited. I couldn't reach her. The fire was too much, too fast. I tried, I swear I tried, but the ceiling collapsed and I had to get out or die with her. His hands clenched into fists. I survived. She didn't. And neither did my wife. Not really. She looked at me after that like I was the one who'd killed our daughter, left 6 months later. Haven't seen her since. Mara felt something break in her chest. Elias, I came here to start over. Built this ranch from nothing, told myself I'd never let fire take anything from me again. He finally looked at her. Then today happened, and I saw those flames, and suddenly I was back in Montana. Back in that hallway, trying to reach a door I couldn't get through. I froze, completely froze. But you came back. Because you pulled me back. You grabbed me and made me focus on now instead of then. He met her eyes. You saved more than the barn today, Mrs. Ellison. You saved me from drowning in my own head. Mara didn't know what to say. She'd spent weeks thinking of Elias as this untouchable, difficult man. Learning he carried this kind of grief, this kind of trauma, it changed everything. I'm sorry, she finally said, about your daughter, about what you lost. Yeah, me too. He straightened up. But tonight I learned something. Learned that maybe I'm not as past it as I thought I was. And learned that having someone who can step up when I can't, that matters more than I realized. They stood in silence as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who'd both lost everything, both rebuilt from nothing, both carrying scars that would never fully heal. But standing there together, the barn damaged but standing, the ranch still functioning, the crew still intact, it felt like maybe survival wasn't the only thing possible. Maybe there was something beyond survival, something that looked like the beginning of trust. The days after the fire felt different. The ranch had always been quiet. Men who worked hard didn't waste breath on unnecessary conversation. But now, the quiet carried a weight it hadn't before. Like everyone was processing what had happened and what it meant. Davies was gone. That should have made things easier. Instead, his absence hung over the crew like a question no one wanted to answer. If one man could turn on them like that, who else might? What other resentments were simmering beneath the surface? Mara felt the shift most at meals. The men ate with a kind of careful attention now, like they were aware of her in ways they hadn't been before. Not hostile, just conscious. She'd taken charge during the fire. She'd organized them, directed them, saved the barn when their boss couldn't. That changed the dynamic in ways she was still figuring out. Frank was the first to acknowledge it directly. 3 days after the fire, he stopped by the kitchen after breakfast. The men want to help with repairs, he said. But they're asking if you need anything fixed first. Kitchen equipment, your room, whatever. Mara looked up from the bread she was kneading. Why are they asking me? Because you proved you're not just the cook anymore. You're crew. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was obvious. When someone's crew, we look out for them. So if you need something, now's the time to say it. She thought about the loose floorboard in her room, the door that stuck in humid weather, the stove handle that came off if you pulled it wrong. Small things she'd been working around because they weren't worth mentioning. The stove handle, she said, and there's a draft coming through the window in my room that makes it cold at night. Frank nodded. I'll send Carter up to fix the window today. I'll handle the stove myself. He turned to leave, then paused. You did good during the fire. Not just good, you kept your head when everyone else was losing theirs. That matters. Elias froze. We all saw it. Frank's expression was complicated. Boss is a good man, but he's got demons. We knew that. What we didn't know was if anyone could pull him back from them. Now we do. After he left, Mara stood in the kitchen feeling something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died, like she was part of something larger than herself, like she mattered not just for what she could do, but for who she was. It was a strange, fragile feeling. She didn't trust it yet, but it was there. That afternoon, Carter showed up to fix her window. He worked quietly, efficiently, replacing the warped frame and sealing the gaps with fresh caulking. When he finished, he tested it twice to make sure it closed properly. Should keep the cold out now, he said, gathering his tools. Thank you. He hesitated at the door. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. During the fire, when you took charge, were you scared? Mara thought about it. Terrified, but being scared and being frozen aren't the same thing. I was scared we'd lose the barn, scared someone would get hurt. But that fear made me move, not stop. Davies always said women couldn't handle real crisis, said they'd panic or cry or fall apart. Carter looked at her directly. You proved him wrong, proved him so wrong he couldn't even face it. That's why he left. Or he left because he set the fire and knew he'd be caught. Maybe both. Carter moved toward the door. Either way, he was wrong about you, and I think he knew it before the fire even happened. That's what really ate at him, knowing a woman could do what he couldn't. After he left, Mara sat on her bed in the now draft-free room, thinking about Davies, about how his resentment had been less about her specifically and more about what she represented, proof that his worldview was wrong, that women weren't weak, weren't liabilities, weren't the problem he needed them to be to justify his own failures. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered the oil-soaked rags, the deliberate attempt to destroy the barn and maybe kill the animals, and any sympathy died. Some men couldn't stand being wrong, and when they couldn't stand it, they burned things down. That evening, Frank installed the new stove handle. It was solid, well-made, better than the original. When Mara tested it, it didn't budge. Should last you years, Frank said, wiping his hands. Old one was cheap ironwork. This is proper steel. Where'd you get it? Made it. Got a forge in the back shed. Do metalwork when there's time. He packed up his tools. Boss told me what happened, during the fire. About his daughter. Mara stilled. He told you? Told all of us. Called a meeting yesterday while you were doing supply inventory. Said we deserved to know why he froze and what it meant. Frank's expression was hard to read. 10 years I've worked for Elias Rourke. Never knew he had a family before this. Never knew he lost them that way. He kept it private. Too private. Men can respect a boss who's been through hell, but they can't respect a boss who pretends he's invincible and then proves he's not. Frank looked at her directly. You being here, pulling him back during the fire, that might have saved more than the barn, might have saved his authority with the crew. I didn't do it for his authority. I did it because the barn was burning. I know, that's what makes it matter. He headed for the door, then stopped. He's planning something. Don't know what yet, but I can tell. Boss gets quiet in a specific way when he's working through a decision. Whatever it is, it involves you. After Frank left, Mara finished dinner prep with Frank's words circling in her mind. Elias was planning something that involved her. She couldn't imagine what, couldn't let herself hope for anything specific, so she focused on the work and tried not to think about it. But at dinner, she felt Elias watching her. Not obviously, not in a way anyone else would notice, but she'd gotten attuned to his presence over the months, learned the weight of his attention, and tonight, that attention felt different, purposeful. After the meal, he asked her to stay behind again. Walk with me, he said once the dining room was empty. They went outside into the cold evening air. The damaged barn stood dark against the sunset, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Elias led her past it, toward the ridge that overlooked the valley below. I've been thinking about what happened, he said, about how I froze, about what that means for this place. You don't have to explain. I do, because I need you to understand something. He stopped at the ridge edge, looking out over the darkening landscape. When I came here 10 years ago, I thought I could bury the past by building something new. Thought if I worked hard enough, focused enough, I could make that fire in Montana into something that happened to someone else, someone who didn't exist anymore. But it didn't work. No. It just meant I spent 10 years carrying weight I never dealt with. And when the barn caught fire, all that weight came crashing down at once. He turned to face her. You pulled me out of that. You didn't know my history, didn't know what you were fighting against, but you grabbed me and made me present, made me useful again. Anyone would have... No, they wouldn't have. Frank would have taken over command and left me standing there. Carter would have tried to snap me out of it and failed. The others would have worked around me and lost the barn in the process. His eyes were intense in the fading light. You saw what needed to happen and made it happen. That takes a specific kind of strength. Mara didn't know what to say. The compliment felt too big, too meaningful. I'm offering you a partnership, Elias said. She blinked. What? Not marriage, not romance. A partnership. He spoke carefully, like he'd practiced this. This ranch needs someone who can run things when I can't. Someone the men respect, who knows the operations, who can make decisions under pressure. That's you. I'm the cook. You're more than that, and we both know it. You've been managing supplies, inventory, logistics. You organized the crew during a crisis. You've earned their respect. Frank's included, which is damn near impossible. He paused. I'm offering you equal stake in the ranch, equal say in decisions, equal share of profits. You'd still handle the kitchen, but you'd also handle operations alongside me. Co-owner, essentially. Mara's mind reeled. Why? Because I need someone I can trust. Someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong, who'll step up when I can't, who'll keep this place running regardless of what happens. He met her eyes. Because you've already been doing the work. This just makes it official and pays you what you're worth. The men will follow you. They already do. Frank respects you. Carter looks up to you. Even Jensen, who doesn't like anyone, trusts you. Elias's voice was firm. This isn't charity. This is recognition of reality. You're already essential to this operation. This just acknowledges it. Mara turned away, looking out over the valley. A partnership. Equal stake. Co-owner of a ranch she'd walked to with nothing but a skillet and desperation. It felt impossible. Too big, too much, but under the disbelief was something else, recognition that he was right. She had been doing more than cooking. She had been managing, organizing, leading when leadership was needed. She'd proven herself capable not just of survival, but of building something. What about when you get married? She asked. When you bring a wife up here, she's not going to want another woman as her husband's business partner. Then I won't get married, or I'll find someone who can handle it. His tone was matter of fact. This isn't about romance or companionship. It's about running a ranch. If some hypothetical future wife can't understand that, she's not the right person anyway. And if I meet someone, if I want to leave, then we negotiate terms, draw up papers that protect both our interests. This is a business arrangement, Mara. It has business solutions. He used her first name, and it felt significant. But I don't think you're going anywhere. I think you've finally found a place that fits. She couldn't argue with that. Because he was right. This ranch, this harsh mountain, these difficult men, this relentless work, it fit her in ways nothing else had. She wasn't happy, exactly. But she was purposeful, needed, essential, and maybe that was better than happy. I need time to think about it, she said. Take the time you need, but know that the offer's real. I've already talked to Frank about it. He supports it completely. You talked to Frank before talking to me? Had to make sure the crew would accept it. Frank's the key to that. If he's on board, the others will follow. Elias smiled slightly. Turns out he's been thinking the same thing. Said you've been acting like a co-owner for weeks anyway. Might as well make it official. They walked back to the house in silence. Mara's mind was racing, turning over the implications, the possibilities, the risks. Equal partnership meant equal responsibility. It meant being tied to this place, this man, this crew for the foreseeable future. It meant giving up any dreams of something easier, softer, more conventional. But what were those dreams worth? She'd already tried conventional. She'd been a wife, a mother, a widow. She'd played by the rules and lost everything anyway. Maybe it was time to try something different, something that didn't fit into neat categories or social expectations. Maybe it was time to just be herself, capable, difficult, stubborn, strong, and let that be enough. That night, lying in her draft-free room, Mara thought about Thomas, about how he'd loved her but never quite understood her, how he'd wanted her to be softer, quieter, more content with domestic routine, how he'd been confused by her need to plan, to organize, to have control over her environment. He would have hated this ranch, would have been baffled by Elias's offer, would have thought she was being unfeminine, overstepping, trying to be something she wasn't. But Thomas was gone, and his version of who she should be had died with him. The woman she was now, the woman who'd climbed 30 miles a mountain, who'd fought for a job everyone said she'd fail at, who'd organized a crew of men to save a burning barn. That woman could absolutely be a ranch co-owner. That woman could be anything she decided to be. 3 days later, Mara found Elias in his office going over accounts. "I accept," she said. He looked up. "The partnership?" "Yes, on 3 conditions." "I'm listening." 1. I want it in writing. Legal documents properly filed, not just a handshake agreement. Already drafted. Lawyer in town drew them up last year when I was thinking about taking on a business partner. Just needed the right person. He pulled out a folder. You can review them, make changes if needed. 2. I want it clear that this is a professional arrangement. No expectations beyond work. No assumptions about anything else. Agreed completely. 3. If either of us wants to end the partnership, we can, with proper notice and fair compensation, but no one's trapped. Elias nodded. That's already in the contract. 5-year initial term, then yearly renewals. Either party can exit with 6 months' notice and fair market buyout of their share. He stood and offered his hand. Do we have an agreement? Mara took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, steady. We have an agreement. They shook, and something shifted in the air between them. Not romance. It wasn't that, but a recognition of equals. Of 2 people who'd both lost everything and rebuilt from nothing, now choosing to build something together. Welcome to full ownership, Mrs. Ellison, Elias said. Call me Mara. If we're partners, we should probably use first names. Mara, then. He smiled, an actual smile, rare and genuine. And you should probably call me Elias. I already do, in my head. Well, now you can do it out loud. The announcement to the crew came at dinner that night. Elias stood at the head of the table and laid it out plain. Mara was now co-owner of the ranch. She'd be handling operations alongside him, making decisions, managing logistics. Anyone who had a problem with it could speak up now or keep it to themselves forever. The men looked at each other. Frank nodded slowly, unsurprised. Carter grinned outright. Jensen shrugged like it was obvious. The others seemed to process it, then collectively decided it made sense. Does this mean the food's going to change? Jensen asked. No, Mara said. I'm still cooking, just also doing everything else. Then I'm fine with it, Jensen said, and went back to his meal. It was possibly the most anticlimactic major announcement Mara had ever witnessed. But somehow that made it more real. The men weren't treating it like a dramatic shift because to them, it wasn't. She'd already been essential. This just made it official. After dinner, Frank pulled her aside. You're going to be good at this, he said. Better than good. You've got the mind for it. Strategic, practical, not afraid to make hard calls. You sound pretty confident. I am. I've worked for Elias 10 years. Never seen him offer partnership to anyone. The fact that he offered it to you says everything about what he thinks you're capable of. Frank's expression was almost warm. And the fact that you negotiated conditions before accepting says everything about why you'll succeed. You're not just taking what's offered, you're making sure it works for you too. That's smart. I learned from watching men fail at that. My husband, mostly. He'd take jobs or deals that sounded good without thinking through the details. Then he'd be stuck in bad situations. She looked at Frank directly. I promised myself I'd never make that mistake. Good. Keep that attitude. He turned to leave, then paused. Martha was wrong for this place. Too ambitious in the wrong ways, wanted power without earning respect first. You're different. You earned everything before asking for anything. The men see that. They'll follow you because of it. Over the next few weeks, Mara settled into her new role. She still woke before dawn to start breakfast, still managed the kitchen, still cooked 3 meals a day. But now she also sat in on planning meetings with Elias and Frank, reviewed the ranch accounts, made decisions about supply orders, work schedules, equipment repairs. It was exhausting. Some days she wanted to scream from the sheer volume of responsibility. But it was also exhilarating. She was building something real, making decisions that mattered, shaping the direction of an entire operation. And slowly, the ranch started changing. Small things at first. The supply orders became more efficient, less waste. The kitchen ran smoother with better organization. The work schedules balanced better between urgent tasks and maintenance. Then bigger things. Mara suggested they start preserving more food in the fall to reduce dependency on winter supply runs. Elias agreed, and they built a proper cold storage shed. She noticed the fencing on the north pasture was deteriorating and recommended repairs before winter. Frank implemented it, and they avoided losing livestock to breaks in the fence line. The ranch started feeling less like a collection of men surviving in isolation and more like an actual functioning operation. And somewhere in that transformation, Mara realized she wasn't just surviving anymore either. She was thriving. Winter deepened, bringing storms that buried the ranch for days at a time. But they were prepared, supplies stocked properly, animals sheltered adequately, systems in place to handle the isolation. The crew worked together smoothly, conflicts minimal, efficiency high. One night in late January, during a lull between storms, Elias found Mara in the kitchen after dinner. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Depends on how personal." "Do you regret it? Taking the partnership? Taking on all this responsibility?" Mara dried her hands and turned to face him. "Some days. When I'm exhausted and everything's going wrong and I remember how simple life was when I just had to cook meals. But most days? No. I don't regret it." "What's the difference between the days you regret it and the days you don't?" "The days I regret it, I'm thinking about what I lost. My husband, my children, the life I thought I'd have, the conventional path that didn't work out." She leaned against the counter. "The days I don't regret it, I'm thinking about what I gained. Purpose, respect. A place where I'm valued for who I actually am, not who I'm supposed to be." Elias nodded slowly. "I understand that. The gap between who you're supposed to be and who you are. You feel it too?" "Every day. I'm supposed to be the invincible ranch owner who never breaks, never doubts, never freezes in the face of fire." His voice carried old pain. "But I'm actually a man who lost his daughter and never recovered, who built a fortress on a mountain to hide from the world, who needed someone else to pull him back from the edge when it mattered most. There's no shame in needing help. I know. Took me 10 years to learn that, but I know it now." He looked at her directly. "Thank you for being the person who taught me. I didn't teach you anything. I just grabbed your shoulders and told you to focus. Sometimes that's all teaching is, someone forcing you to be present when you'd rather disappear." They stood in the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the months. Not quite friendship, they weren't that familiar yet, but partnership. A mutual understanding of two people who'd both survived things that should have broken them. "The crew's talking about spring," Elias said eventually, "making plans for planting, fence repairs, bringing in new livestock. Frank thinks we should expand the northern pasture. What do you think?" "I think we should discuss it, together, as partners." He smiled slightly. "That's going to take getting used to, having someone to discuss things with instead of just deciding alone. We can practice, start with small decisions and work up to the big ones." "Like what?" "Like whether we should change the breakfast rotation. Jensen's been requesting eggs 4 days a week and I'm running low on supply. Tell Jensen he gets eggs twice a week like everyone else. If he wants more, he can trade his bacon portion." Mara laughed. "See? You're already thinking in partnership terms, consulting me on kitchen decisions." "That's because kitchen decisions affect food supply, which affects budget, which affects the whole operation." He pushed off from where he'd been leaning. "Everything's connected. Took me years to understand that. You seem to know it instinctively. I learned it from managing a household on almost nothing. When you have no margin for error, you learn how everything affects everything else. A useful skill for ranch management. Apparently. He headed toward the door, then turned back. Mara? Yes? I'm glad you walked up that mountain. Glad you didn't quit. Glad you're here. Before she could respond, he was gone. But the words stayed with her, warm and solid, as she finished the evening's work. Spring came slowly to the mountain, fighting its way through the last gasps of winter. The snow began melting, revealing a landscape that looked exhausted but alive. Streams that had been frozen for months started flowing. The first green shoots appeared in protected valleys. And the ranch, damaged but standing, began its renewal. They repaired the burned section of barn, replacing charred boards with fresh lumber. Frank's metalwork skills proved invaluable, creating new fixtures and supports. Carter and Jensen handled the heavy construction. Mara managed the supply logistics, making sure they had materials when needed without excess waste. The work was hard, but there was an energy to it that hadn't been there before. The men worked with purpose, knowing they were building something that would last. And they worked as a unified crew, not just a collection of individuals. Mara watched it all while continuing to manage the kitchen and the growing list of operational duties. Some days she was so tired she could barely stand. But she kept going, kept pushing, because this was hers now. Not just the kitchen or the cooking, but the whole operation. She had stake in it, ownership, and that made all the difference. One afternoon in early March, while reviewing accounts with Elias in his office, a rider appeared on the ridge trail. Coleman, the supply merchant, but weeks ahead of schedule. He dismounted looking worried. Got news from town. Big logging company's been buying up properties in the area. They're looking to expand operations, and word is they've got their eye on this ridge. Elias's expression darkened. This land's not for sale. Didn't say it was. Just warning you they might come asking. They've got money, and they're not shy about using it. Coleman glanced at Mara. Heard you're co-owner now. Congratulations. Thank you. You'll want to make sure your claim documents are solid. Company like that, they'll look for any weakness to exploit. Survey disputes, title issues, anything they can use to force a sale or take the land through legal means. After Coleman left, Mara and Elias spent the evening going through every document related to the ranch. Deeds, surveys, water rights, grazing permits, making sure everything was in order, every piece of paper accounted for. You worried? Mara asked. Concerned. Big companies have ways of getting what they want, but this land's mine, ours now, and it's paid for free and clear. They can't force us off without cause. He set down a stack of papers. We just need to make sure we don't give them cause. Meaning? Meaning we run this place perfectly. No violations, no disputes with neighbors, no missed tax payments, nothing they can use as leverage. We're already doing that. Then we keep doing it, and we prepare for them to try anyway. 2 weeks later, 3 men in expensive suits arrived at the ranch. They represented Cascade Lumber Company, and they wanted to make an offer. Elias met them in the main room with Mara and Frank present. The lead man, a smooth-talking lawyer named Pierce, laid out their proposal. They'd buy the ranch for 3 times its assessed value. The crew could stay on as employees of the lumber company if they wanted. Easy transition, good money, everyone wins. No, Elias said. Pierce smiled like he'd expected that. You haven't heard the full offer yet. Don't need to. Ranch isn't for sale. Mr. Rourke, be reasonable. That's a substantial sum of money, more than you'd make ranching in 10 years. I didn't build this place to sell it. Pierce's smile faded slightly. Then perhaps your partner would like to discuss it. He turned to Mara. Mrs. Ellison, as co-owner, you must see the advantage of accepting this offer. Financial security, freedom from the burden of managing a remote ranch, opportunities elsewhere. Mara met his eyes calmly. The answer is still no. You might want to think about it. I have thought about it. The ranch isn't for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Is there anything else we can help you with? Pierce's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Cascade Lumber always gets what it wants, one way or another. We're offering you the easy way, but there are other ways. Frank stepped forward. That sounds like a threat. It's a reality. We have lawyers, resources, political connections. We can make operating this ranch very difficult if we choose to. Pierce stood. I'll give you a week to reconsider. After that, we pursue other options. After they left, Frank turned to Elias. They're going to come at us hard. I know. What do we do? Mara spoke up. We document everything, every boundary line, every water source, every piece of this operation. We make sure there's no legal foothold for them to grab onto. And we reach out to neighboring ranches. If Cascade's targeting us, they're probably targeting others too. Strength in numbers. Elias nodded. Frank, send word to the Henderson Ranch and the Miller property. See if they've been approached. Mara, start organizing our documents. I'll ride to town tomorrow and talk to the county clerk. Make sure all our filings are current. They worked through the night, preparing. And in the process, Mara realized something had shifted again. They weren't just a crew anymore. They were something more unified, more purposeful. They were people fighting for something they'd built together. And they weren't going to lose without a fight. Over the next 3 weeks, Cascade Lumber tried everything. They sent surveyors to dispute property lines. Mara produced original deeds that proved the ranch boundaries. They claimed water rights violations. Elias showed permits dating back 20 years. They tried to bribe county officials to create regulatory problems. Frank organized neighboring ranches to fight back collectively. Every attack failed. Because the ranch's records were impeccable, the crew was unified, and Mara and Elias worked together seamlessly to counter each move. Finally, Pierce returned with one last offer. Double the previous amount, final chance. No, Mara and Elias said simultaneously. Pierce stood. You're going to regret this. Probably, Elias said. But we'll regret it on our own land, running our own operation, answering to no one but ourselves. Now get off my property. After Pierce left for the final time, the crew gathered in the main room. They'd won. The ranch was safe. Carter raised his coffee cup. To the stubbornest damn owners in the territory. The others raised their cups. To the owners. Mara felt something warm spread through her chest. These men, this crew, they weren't just workers anymore. They were family, chosen family built through shared struggle and mutual respect. And this ranch, this harsh mountain fortress, it wasn't just a place to work. It was home. That night, standing on the ridge with Elias, watching the sun set over the valley they'd fought to keep, Mara thought about the woman who'd arrived here 4 months ago. Desperate, alone, carrying nothing but a skillet and determination. That woman wouldn't recognize who she'd become, wouldn't understand the strength she'd found, the respect she'd earned, the life she'd built. You thinking about something profound? Elias asked. Just about how far I've come. From widow with nothing to ranch co-owner who just fought off a lumber company. She smiled. It's been a strange journey. Strange is one word for it. He looked at her. For what it's worth, I'm glad you made that journey. Glad you ended up here. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence as the light faded. Two people who'd both lost everything, both rebuilt from nothing, now standing together on land they'd defended as equals. It wasn't the life Mara had imagined, wasn't conventional or comfortable or easy, but it was hers, earned through work and will and refusal to quit. And standing there on that mountain, watching her ranch settle into evening, she realized something important. She'd finally found the place where she fit, not because it was easy or welcoming or made for her, but because she'd made herself fit through sheer force of competence and determination. The woman with the wooden spoon had become the woman who owned the mountain, and that was enough.